So we can always turn the gain down. We messed with that before.
Turn your gain down, sure.
Shall we? See if that makes a difference.
Go on, keep talking.
Yeah. Is that
It's changing for sure.
Okay.
So turn it up, turn it a bit more up.
How about now?
One, two, no,
one,
just
two.
turn it up.
1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2
Oh,
1 2. Yeah.
You guys are getting a lesson right
now.
Yeah,
1 2. I don't know what we're doing. 1 2 1 2.
So for those watching, I'll clip this, right? The gain on these Blue Yeti mics is almost like exactly what it means, gain, how much of your voice it takes in. And Matt's was quite high.
Yeah.
And now he's turned it down.
Is that looking okay?
Oh, it's more than fine.
Good.
No, turn it up a bit.
This one, yeah?
Yeah. There we go.
Try that.
Yeah.
Try that.
Yeah, give us a 1 2.
Yeah, 1 2 1 2.
I love it. So on that note, welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
Matt Wilde, absolute pleasure to have you here. The first time I heard about you must have been 6-7 months ago, and I was anticipating this podcast since.
Let's go.
Your management team really came through. I appreciate them.
Of course.
And I'm glad you're here today. So Matt, producer and a musician.
Yeah.
Now, people often think about musician in terms of primarily singing, songwriting, but you make beats. And that's really all you do, right?
Yeah.
So describe your process. I want to get into the creative mind of Matt Wilde.
Yeah, sure. So I guess at the heart of what I do is the piano. So I've been playing piano most of my life. And then when I went to high school, I started making beats. And I guess even as early as like year 7 or 8, for those who aren't in the UK, that's like age 12 to 14. I started producing beats. And as early as then, I really imagine a world where I kind of fuse the two together. So now, 15 years later...
15 years, amazing.
I'm making instrumental tracks that have the piano at the heart of them, whether that's melodies or improvisation, as well as beats. So yeah, basically making chill beats. And that's kind of like...
You're very much into your jazz.
Yeah. So yeah, I've played jazz piano for a long time, which is rooted in improvisation, which I'm sure we can get into a bit more. But yeah, basically play jazz keys, but over sort of like more modern sort of beats, I guess, kind of hip hop. That's how I see it, but I guess
your music is very relaxing.
Thank you.
So with you, I was slightly taken back when I first listened to your album because I was waiting for the lyrics.
Right.
So I'm there listening I've downloaded and I'm listening to Hello World, your latest EP album.
That album, yeah.
And I was like, where's the lyrics?
Right.
And then I found myself that I'm discovering a different style of a musician here because I'm so used to rappers and singers.
Of course.
So it made me think, you don't have the lyrical melody in your head. So what does Matt do to get the flow of the beat?
Okay.
What does Matt do to match the drum set or the audio that he's trying to make in his head? Because if I'm singing a melody, let's say before making the beat, I can sometimes imagine where I would want the beat to be, where the high notes. So, but when there's no lyrics there, how do you do
that? So I guess the music I'm making is built upon many years and generations of heritage in the jazz world.
Wow.
Which is fundamentally Black American music. And I grew up sort of listening to jazz records and jazz musicians where they would play with others, sometimes by themselves, but mostly with other band members. And they were creating instrumental music. Of course, there were like singers, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Frank Sinatra, who came later, not particularly later, but who added lyrics to already popular jazz songs. So the jazz heritage is predominantly instrumental music, and I guess I'm kind of doing my own version of that today. And so to go to your question, when I'm writing music, for Hello World specifically, I basically started each of those songs on the piano, so no beats, and they just began as sketches, almost like if you were a painter or, you know,
a rough at the beginning.
Draft. It's just sketches. And I'm always driven by melody, funnily enough. Whilst I'm not actually thinking of lyrics, I'll often sing what I'm hearing and translate that into the top line on the piano. And then there are infinite ways to then colour each of those melody notes, if you will.
Do you hum things to yourself? Do you like play little like bum bum bum? Like,
yeah, it's all
because I've seen because for
all
those
the time.
For those that don't know, Matt has a YouTube channel,
right? Yeah,
and you're active on social media anyway,
yeah.
and you have a lot of videos teaching people how to make notes.
Yeah,
and I'm not going to try and replicate it, but. Because I can't even remember the name of some of the notes that you play. So what are your favorite notes for a musician listening? Yeah. What notes are most repeated in your instrumentals?
Well, I mean, there's probably no favorites, but there are maybe some chords that I use a lot, or at least like, you know, I often think about music as in color. And say if you had a melody note, let's say D, there are infinite ways to color that note to give a totally different feeling. So you've got a palette almost, like to keep on the visual art analogy. So you've got like major chords, minor chords, you've got like dominant chords, and then like dominant altered chords and diminished chords and half diminished chords. And to me, all of these sort of codes, if you will, they're basically just colors. And so if you had a melody note D, you could play that in so many different ways and in different combinations to basically express yourself. And there are certain colors that I use a lot that I think are characteristic of the way I see the world and feel, basically, and like to express myself. So, yeah.
Okay, very interesting. Believe in Things. That was released when?
That was 2021 in about April.
That was an EP?
That was an EP, yeah. That was my first project that I put together under my name, Matt Wilde, which is just my real name. Yeah, and that came off the back of a period of like lockdown that we were all in.
Yes.
And the way that I dealt with that period of time was just writing music. And that's when I started sharing. So I've always written music, Lazo. I've always written music pretty much every day.
But when you say written music, I know listeners are listening and they're thinking lyrics, but you're not saying that, are you?
No, I'm thinking piano, drums, bass, beats. Yeah. So making beats every day might be a better description, actually.
Yeah.
And I've always worked with other artists to realize their sound. I think that's kind of the role that I like playing. I like being a bit behind the scenes and helping you sound good. You know what I mean? But when we were in lockdown, I think, you know, it was a shift in, it was a shift in pace, a shift in structure and routine. And so I started sharing videos on Instagram, basically beat making videos. And I think just more and more people started getting onto them and like messaging me or commenting on those videos. And then I had a few messages from people who were working with record labels asking me, where's your music? We've been enjoying these videos. Like, have you considered releasing music? And I hadn't really, under my own name. And then had a really lovely conversation and built a relationship with the founder of Deep Matter Records. And he gave me a lot of encouragement to put out that project and supported me on that journey, really, to, I guess, be vulnerable enough to share my first project.
It's not easy.
It's not easy. And so that's how that came about, really. It was like a particular time during lockdown, making videos as a way of documenting what I was doing.
Share your craft with the world.
I mean, I started making videos to literally just document what I was doing as a way of just kind of, just having a bit of a archive of the things I was working on, because I wasn't releasing music. I wasn't thinking of myself as a solo artist at that time. And yeah, I just wanted to be able to say, might sound mad, but I would often be asked by friends, so what have you been working on? And having a video, I could show you, for example, if you asked me that question, I could say, oh, check out these tracks I've been making.
And that's easier and better understanding for someone who isn't in your industry.
Right.
Because they see what you're making, they see how you're making it, and it's easier for them to engage.
Right. And I mean, I didn't really know that at the time. You know, I learned that as time went on a bit.
Because we're such visual communicators as well. Like if you tell a random person, these are the notes I play on my keyboard, they're thinking the most basic way. Keyboard, it's a black key and then a white key, and then they just clicks it.
Yeah.
And they're probably thinking, you know, those big keyboards that people play with their feet and stuff in stores. And my point being, once you show, people visualize, understand better, and you inspire. Because now it looks like, look at what Matt's doing. It's so fun. And he's just, because your videos as well, what I've noticed is on the bottom, like 20% of it, you have the keys and you highlight what's being played. So for me, who's someone not familiar with your craft, I engage better with your videos when I can see what you're doing.
I love that. Yeah, I love that.
Good feedback.
Yeah, thank you.
Matt Wilde on YouTube, like and subscribe.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers for the plug. No, I mean, look, I think that's really great. Yeah.
So I noticed I've got a couple of points, but here's the most important one. And I just realized it was important now. Check this out.
Yeah.
You released or started to make those videos during lockdown.
Yeah.
I officially released my first episode of the podcast during lockdown.
Yeah.
My last guest, Charisma, who works for Louis Vuitton as an architect, she started to engage on social media during lockdown.
Yeah.
My point being, lockdown seemed to be a time where creatives thrived because there was minimal, there was a big distraction. It was a pandemic, but there was minimal existing distractions like work, schedules, having to keep up with a social life, things that might sometimes take away from the mind of a creative, because now we have all the time in the world to just sit in a room and make music, and no one in your family is going to say, Matt, why are you spending 10 hours a day making music?
Right.
Because in this abnormal time, which lockdown was, it made the creative, impulsive, repetitive behavior of a creative normal.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Validated almost.
No one, creatives can be ridiculed for their excessive, obsessive passion, but then how long it takes for them to make it. But when there is no outside distraction of, why are you doing that craft 10 hours a day that isn't bringing in any money? You can just focus. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
100%.
Like, I feel like you could be a lawyer, you could be a doctor, you can be an architect, and there's a path there, and then you start making money.
Yeah.
You can be a creative, and it can be difficult to stay on track, but there's no one there to nudge you and tell you you're wasting your time, and all you can do is just be in a room and make music. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
Lockdown was almost a great thing for us creatives.
Yeah.
It was just, I can do whatever I want, no opinions, and everyone was at home. They had all the time in the world to take in content. So I don't know about you, but I also feel like during that time period, my views were almost higher. Even though it was early days of the podcast.
Yeah.
Because people were more at home.
Yeah.
They had time to take in more. Whereas now we're all back to our busy life schedules, and people are now listening to our content at their leisure.
Yeah.
More than because they need something to fill the day.
Yeah. It's really interesting. One thing that I've thought about as a result of that period of time is, because I've also spoken to a lot of people in different fields, not just creatives, who started new businesses, gave more time to their passion projects. As a result, have that period of time was a catalyst for them to branch off and do something new, whether that's open a business or start that consultancy they always wanted to, or work in PR and work freelance because that's always been their passion, or like myself, making beats and music or podcasting. I often think that imagine a world where us as human beings had the permission to be able to work long and hard on the thing that gets us out of bed in the morning.
Yes.
Over a fixed period of time, 2, 3, 4 years, let's say, which is a good amount of time, to be able to be dedicated to your passion and the thing that you want to share with the world. I sometimes think, imagine a world where we had permission to do that without the catastrophe of a lockdown or pandemic or, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
But imagine a world where there was some way in which we were supported to do that as human beings, because whilst that's an investment up front, sure, I might just be making music indefinitely, never make money from it, let's say, but given enough time and passion, when the two collide, I think that often leads to great things. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
I'm going to clip that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, you worded it better than me. I genuinely felt like I was waffling for a
No, not at all. No, it just, what you were saying kind of made me think that, like, imagine like a radically different society. I guess we're all under the guise of like capitalism.
There's too many constraints.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. Like, I kind of understand.
Yeah, of course.
One thing I've always realized is unfortunately, the older you get, the more you have to compromise, and you also have to live, right? And that sounds cliche, but you might have a family. You might be married in a relationship. The point is, there's always a compromise. I remember this. You know who Zayn Lowery is?
Yeah.
Are you a fan of Kanye West?
Not his recent stuff necessarily, but growing up for sure.
But you understand that Kanye is one of the best creatives of our time, especially his earlier work, you're right.
Yeah.
He has this iconic moment. I might have mentioned this on a previous podcast.
Yeah.
He's talking with Zayn Lowery and he goes, I didn't actually like the song Gold Digger.
Yeah, I remember. I've seen this interview, I think.
And he starts explaining to Zayn that I knew Gold Digger would bring in plays and money, but I knew it wasn't something I was overly creative about. But he was talking about how you have to compromise. And unfortunately, because in life we all have to compromise, people do struggle to dedicate 10 years of their life. You've been here 15 years, man.
Of course.
Matt, that is a lifetime.
Yeah, of course, man.
That's more than half the time I've been on this planet.
I need to, exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I need to remind myself of that.
15 years is, wow.
Yeah.
To even go for 3 years.
Yeah.
20% of that time.
Yeah.
Is long enough.
I think with that, I think sometimes people see, the outermost edge of what I'm doing through a video or an Instagram post or maybe an album. But then actually what came before that was a lot of trial and error, a lot of experimentation, a lot of practice on the piano.
Long nights.
All of this kind of stuff. And so...
With your sofa bed in your studio.
Exactly. I've done your research.
I've done my research.
Jokes. Exactly. So, but do you get what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, it's easy to see the thing on the outside, like the product or whatever you want to call it. But everything that came before was a lot of sort of sacrifice, a lot of mistakes, which all lead to this point today.
Wow. What I would say is that consistency, no matter what field you're in, is sometimes the hardest thing to have to begin with.
100%.
The visual part of what we do is actually a bonus. No one would actually complain, or very few people would complain, if I just decided to do nothing but release on Apple and Spotify, have no video. This is really a bonus. 90% of the listeners are coming from Apple, Spotify, Google.
Yeah.
So they're not even seeing my face.
That's great.
Most people, I reckon, that are listening to me right now have never seen my face. Because podcasting is one of, and music as well, is one of, you don't need to brand yourself like that. It's just a bonus.
Of course.
We're talking about branding yourself.
Okay.
How has Matt Wilde gone from Matt Wilde to Matt Wilde the musician?
Different things. So I've always worked. I always had to pay my way. So I've done lots of different jobs. So no matter the job that I was doing, I would always make time for music. And I think that's the first point, is that I didn't know it at the time, but I think there was just something inside of me that had a desire and a need to create. and to write music and to make beats and to express myself through that medium. And so that's the first point. That's when that's the first hallmark of a musician, I guess, like no matter what's going on in their life,
make time.
Yeah.
I mean, we make time for the things that we love.
Right, exactly. And I never thought about it like that because I was just doing it. But so that's like the first sort of like, that's the first point. And then I guess through sharing videos, I learned a lot about how I wanted to share my music with the world with visuals, because that's not something I'd ever considered before.
You mean music with visuals?
Yeah, and I mean not like music videos, but I mean like short beat making videos on Instagram, let's say.
So tutorial?
Tutorial is part of it, but not exclusively.
Okay.
I'd say most of my videos are basically me making beats with small moments of maybe sharing behind the scenes. Like on Instagram, I'll always now put like the chords that I'm using on the screen.
Yes.
Even if you don't know what that is, I think maybe that's quite interesting and stimulating to see what I'm thinking about or how I'm even making the sounds that you're hearing.
It helps me visualize what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because I have no idea these keys. You name these keys.
Yeah.
It's like me saying a Blue Yeti mic. Most people are like, what's a Blue Yeti?
They might just know microphone.
They're thinking Monsters Inc. So Blue Yeti sat down I'm like, no, this thing right here is a Blue Yeti mic.
Yeah.
So the visualization of what you're doing is as important as actually what you're actually doing.
Yeah.
Because it's a form of communication.
Yeah.
So as an architect, we're always taught that when you sketch or when you draw, you do it in a way that your client can understand. Because if I just gave you a 2D plan, as intelligent as you could be in your field, you're like, what the hell is this 2D plan?
Of course.
And if I saw a music sheet note or note sheet, and because it has all the typical, what are they? They look like cues backwards.
They're like stems and like note heads and
stems. You say stems, I think plants.
Yeah.
And you think music.
There you go.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's interesting. So like branding. So I think little things like that. But actually, it's weird because the videos I make and the music I make is just, I've never tried to, at this point, like compromise my own personal identity. So what I mean by that is the videos I make are just a accumulation of moments of trial and error to best communicate myself.
So how long does a 10-minute video actually take? Because a lot of your tutorials are around that length. So
the YouTube video. So I'm quite new to the YouTube space. I've posted 7 videos now weekly, which is so in its early days. I will film on average for about 90 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And then that'll be clipped down to 10 minutes. But you have to realize I'm not premeditating those videos. I might have some bullet points on my phone, but I'm not scripting things. I'm not, I am scripting in the extent of I have these 6 bullet points that I want to talk about, but then I will make music on camera in the moment. So essentially you're seeing an edited form of the genuine music making process, which is just, I guess, part of my brand. But actually that's just how I want to communicate with people. I don't want to try and fake it. I just want to be raw. And if the video ends up being rubbish, then that's fine. We don't need to post it, because I can't make good music all the time. And so
that's subjective as well.
Subjective, yeah.
As creatives, we're harsh on ourselves.
All the time.
So I'll turn around and I'll be like, this podcast was bad. And this is before I even release it. Yeah. Now, I might not mean bad enough that it can't be released, but I'm just harsh on myself. And I think, look, I want to do better. But that's because we are our own biggest critics. Yeah. And you have to be. Yeah. But you also have to believe in yourself.
Absolutely.
You should always carry yourself in a humble manner, but you yourself believe in yourself, and that's why you're here every day. Yeah. Because no one in their right mind thinks to themselves constantly, I'm going to fail, and then has the mental strength to carry on.
Of course,
So you believe in yourself. Matt, once upon a time, 10 years ago, still believed that Matt would be somewhere. Yeah. Here, I don't know. I don't know what you envisioned for yourself, but you're here because you believe in yourself.
Yeah. 10 years ago, right? That's really interesting. I just thought of like 3 points based on what you were saying. So believing myself 10 years ago, funnily enough, 10 years ago, I started taking the piano seriously. I was listening to a lot of other producers, other people who were making beats like Jay Dilla, Madlib, Pete Rock, kind of like 90s hip hop producers. And I was listening to a lot of their stuff, a lot of their instrumentals. And there was a particular Jay Dilla track called Life, where he basically sampled a jazz record. And without going into too much detail, it was the closest thing that I'd heard that it was almost like a mirror that was playing the music that I imagined for myself back to me. Mm-hmm. It was like a crazy experience. So I found the sample that he used, and it was a Bill Evans record. Bill Evans is a jazz pianist. Highly recommend listening to his stuff if you haven't listened to jazz or taken the time to go down that path. Anyway, I had heard of Bill Evans but never listened to his stuff until hearing that record. And I spent that same evening listening to the whole album. And literally the next day, I started playing the piano and taking it seriously. And what I mean by that is practicing piano every day. So I started listening to his records, trying to learn what he was doing by ear, replicate it on the piano, trial and error, until maybe I eventually get somewhere. But basically, 10 years ago, I kind of said to myself that one day what I would like to be doing is almost like making beats like Jay Dilla, like that track that I just heard. Mm-hmm. But Jay Dilla was sampling other people's recordings. So for those who don't know, sampling is where you might take a pre-existing record or song. Take part of it, reimagine it, rework it into something fresh.
Speed it up, slow it down.
So many different techniques. And sampling in of itself is an incredibly deep art form. But that wasn't something that I ever really got into. Instead, I heard that record and I thought, imagine a world where one day I might be able to play keys like Bill Evans, so play piano, jazz piano like Bill Evans, but make beats like Jay Dilla.
Oh, wow.
Just imagine a world like that. So 10 years ago, I wrote that down in so many words, and I guess today, whilst I don't play keys like Bill Evans or make beats like Jay Dilla necessarily, I think just having those role models who I'd obviously never met before, but just musical sort of role models, led to this path that I'm doing now. So it's almost like 10 years ago I set that intention, and today I'm kind of closer to that vision, which is really bizarre. I hadn't really thought about that until what you were saying.
It's the art of conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then,
because I was going to ask you, and I think you've all kind of answered it, but there'll be more answers to this question, is why music? What made 12-year-old Matt, I know you said you took it seriously 10 years ago, but before that, something still drove Matt to want to make music instead of, for example, going outside to play football.
I think
where was your crossroads and why?
So both of my parents are musicians.
Oh, okay. That is amazing.
Yeah, both of my parents are musicians and they both play the piano. And whilst I never...
So this is like second nature to you. You grew up and you saw that on a consistent basis.
Right. But I was never involved in it, interestingly. I think it's the best thing that they ever did, in that. So they're both pianists, but they never forced me to play the piano. They never sat me down and taught me, learn this, learn that. And I think that that's often the pathway for a lot of incredible piano players. They'll have structured discipline routines from really young ages, like 3 or 4 years old.
These are things you learn from your primary socialization. So one thing I always say in every regard is that success breeds success. So you grew up in a household surrounded by 2 successful musicians. So subconsciously, little Matt, if we can call him that, from a very early age was shown through example how to be a successful musician.
Yeah.
And I think that goes a long way to who you are today.
Yeah. I think that's definitely part of it. But I think also, my parents could have sat me down and, sent me off to piano lessons or had this rigid approach, which they didn't do. And I think that as a result of that, I managed to find my own way in music.
Mm-hmm.
So no one ever told me how music should sound. No one ever told me, Matt, this is how you play these things. I kind of discovered that on my own terms. And as a result, I think I'll have a relationship with music my whole life. Whereas if my parents similarly could have sat me down and said, you need to play it like this, based on their own experiences.
Well, is there a right way to play music?
No, but I think that some people would think that, without going into too much detail of the nuance
closed off.
Maybe. But, I think if I'd had a different start in music, I might not have the relationship I have with it today. I have a lot of friends who so for example, I never studied music at school. I never studied music at college, never studied music at university. And I think...
What did you do by out of interest?
So I studied business in uni.
Oh, you made a flip.
Yeah, but then that was probably because I just didn't know what else I wanted to do.
No, but still, that is a big difference.
Yeah, very different.
I think, do you know like how they say sometimes in life what's meant for you can't miss you?
Yeah.
So
that's a beautiful phrase.
Music was kind of meant for Matt, and
yeah,
it couldn't miss him even if you went completely to the other avenue.
Yeah, so...
Because life put it in front of you in your house. I don't want it.
Yeah. But I
was listening to all these musicians growing up. I don't want it.
Yeah, right.
You went into business, you're still like, I don't want it. Nah. And then somehow, music found its way back to Matt.
Yeah, and I think that's really true. But, I never studied it at schools like a lot of my friends did. And, I know a lot of musicians who went through the what would you call it? Like the pathway of music through school, through college, through uni, who are incredible musicians today. But I also know equal amounts of musicians who are now doing other things because the structural pedagogy, which is like the methodology of teaching music, I think could drive the creativity out of the musician to an extent. Of course, I don't have experience of that firsthand, although I went to university for 2 weeks until last year where I...
Last year you did a master's?
Enrolled in a master's, yeah.
And that's the first time you did education based around music?
And check this out. So I went there. It was the Guildhall School in London. They're like a conservatoire, very prestigious, I guess I would say.
Big deal, right?
Yeah, I think so, and so I auditioned for that and then, got accepted. And then on the very first day, I just knew it wasn't for me. And ended up, I guess you could say dropping out.
Oh, wow.
After 2 weeks, actually less than 2 weeks to be fair. And I think that was because I had never had music education in that sort of formal context. And I felt like a fish out of water, which for me was confusing. It made me be self-critical. I had a lot of self-doubt around that time. Anyway, I just made the decision just to leave that and carry on with what I was doing. And then that's when I wrote my album and then released that album, Hello World. So the bit of experience I had with music education lasted 2 weeks. And I'm talking formal music education because, of course, I'm always learning. I have mentors. I've had like one-to-one lessons with incredible piano players who have shared a lot with me, but not in the context of an education system like school or university.
So is there a stubbornness to being a creative where a part of you didn't just maybe dislike how music was being taught, but a part of you also just didn't want to be told how to make your passion?
Yeah, maybe. Probably.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, probably.
Because I always think to myself with this podcast, even when I think ahead and I think ahead to potential sponsorships and deals, I always think to myself, the last thing I want is to be told how to do it. Because I haven't worked this hard to be dictated by somebody. Tell me what I can say and what I can't say, who I should have on, who I can't have on. And I think creatives have that type of stubbornness to them. And I think this is also why within 2 hours of knowing each other, me and you can have a conversation like this, because we come from a field where communication is more than verbal, right? The way me and you communicate is a shared experience of passionately creating something, a craft, a process. I don't make music like you, but I understand what it is to be up till 3, 4 a.m. just listening to something on repeat. You're listening to music chords. I'm listening to the sound of something.
Of course.
You're looking at the pattern of the beats. I'm listening to the pattern of speech, right? And a part of me actually thinks there was a stubbornness to Matt, and Matt was probably thinking, don't tell me how to create my passion.
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
maybe there was more to it than that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that element. I think with my intention to go to university and do that course at Guildhall was to hone my craft on the piano specifically. I've never had a dedicated period of my life where that's the only thing that I focused on, which is to practice the piano, get better each day, and put in the work as far as developing my skills on the piano. So that was the intention for that. And then I got there, and I guess I didn't have many expectations, but how I imagined it to be was that it would be a personally tailored program where I would say, right, Lazo, this is where you're at today. We've heard your audition. We've read your application. We get a really good sense of where you're at. Almost like an open dialogue. I imagine a world where they would have asked me something like, what, in the next couple of years, what would you like to be different at the end of it that you don't have today? And how can we facilitate that? How can we help you get there? So I might have said, I want to do my first tour. I want to have released my first album, written my second album. I might have had some goals, but nowhere did anyone sort of ask, what I would like to get out of this, opportunity. So for me, if I was educating anyone, that's how I would imagine my pedagogy to be. I would say, Lazo, say, for example, if you're a music producer or wanted to get better at the piano, I would spend a long time asking open questions to try and really get to the bottom of what it is that you would like to have in the world. What would you like to be here today that you don't currently? Or what would you like to be here tomorrow that you don't today? And I would spend a long time trying to get to the bottom of that, whereas the short experience I had was, so I would describe that approach as a bottom-up approach, where we're starting at the foundations and we'll work together to help build the thing that you want to work on. Whereas my experience of Guildhall, and it's through no fault of their own, it's economic structures, it's making money, it's the viability of the student fees versus the teachers' salaries. There's so much going on politically, economically, and so on. But their approach was, here's how you do music. You have to learn this thing and play this concert and play all this music that I just didn't really care about. And I think if I was younger, maybe doing an undergrad, maybe it would be a different story. But I'm sort of glad I didn't do that, because as a result, I ended up forging my own path in music.
Well, I think the problem with education as a whole, is that it tries to facilitate and funnel through millions of students. Now, in your case, much less, because this is a very specialized master's course.
Sure, yeah.
But there's still a larger quantity of people that then maybe is necessary.
Yeah.
Like you said, they need to get money. And so how do you get money and funding? Where does funding come from? Either private or publicly money given to students. My point being, it's hard for any education system or course to cater something to you, because we have another 50 students to look after. And if all of them came back and said, we want it done in a specific way, then all of a sudden, one tutor is only suitable for 10 students.
I know.
But we have to make sure that everyone can funnel through and be on the same track.
I understand it.
And that is probably where society in some ways lose its expressive creativity. Having said that, when you want to do something, you do it. We also have to be brave enough. I think a lot of creatives maybe struggle with their self-confidence.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. For me and you, it might be normal now to put out content that strangers on the other side of the world can enjoy.
Yeah.
But when you're starting off, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. It's surreal. Like, have you ever stopped and wondered, looking at your downloads, how is someone in a different country listening to my content?
Yeah, I think, for sure. I do stop to smell the flowers occasionally, and stuff like that is...
Does it make you nervous?
It's crazy to me. Nervous, yeah, kind of, but maybe it's a bit of excitement as well.
It makes me nervous.
The potential, yeah.
You
nervous.
Know, like earlier I said to you, I didn't know what downloads were when I first started my podcast.
Yeah, of course.
And now we're literally almost at 60,000 downloads. And it almost scares me.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, hold on, how might this potentially, humbly speaking, change my life?
Yeah, of course.
Because I always think to myself, will there be a time where I make the podcast and all of a sudden everything is being scrutinized and criticized and I'm getting feedback left, right and center, and how is my brain going to commute with that? So as you've gotten bigger and more successful, you obviously get more feedback.
Yeah.
And now what you do is not just a representation of Matt Wilde, but the label you represent, correct?
Yeah, well, I've worked with different labels. I'm not currently signed.
You're not currently signed?
In the traditional format where I have like a long-term relationship with a record label. So far, I've worked with different labels on a project-by-project
bring
basis.
A different pressure?
Yeah. I think so. It's like a credibility or something. I don't know. Yeah, I want to make the best music possible, which is not always easy, when you've got like different priorities, or not priorities, but when you've got you're managing and juggling lots of different aspects of the music creation that aren't just music.
How does having a label, or does having a label, change the way you make music?
Fundamentally, no. Actually, no, I don't think so. Because I think it could do in like more, I guess, like the pop genre, or in other genres. And I think there's the genre I'm kind of involved in. Actually, whilst it is increasing with editorial playlists that prioritize easy listening music. And so I'm seeing a lot of growth over the last few years because of, Spotify and Apple Music playlists that prioritize things like, music to game to, or lo-fi beats or jazz beats or whatever it is. Yeah, I think I've not signed any deals that compromise sort of my creativity. So I'd say it doesn't really.
Okay.
I think working with record labels establishes like credibility, and you also have when you work with a record label, like even like an independent record label, you've got someone who's championing your work and someone who's advocating for you. And I think that is the benefit.
Well, your success is their success.
Right.
Having said that, is there more accountability? Are there deadlines? Are there numbers that have to be met? Like, Matt, if we're going to fund your next project, we want a certain turnover. We want you to be a certain level of popular download numbers.
Yeah. So I think deadlines, yes. Lots of ideas around content and number of pieces of content and scheduling that content around a campaign, which actually to me, I can see the program, so to speak, and I just run the program. So if I get a spreadsheet and it's like, we need all of these assets on different days, I'm happy to just create them in the best interest of the project. And I'll just try and have fun doing that. So I can just run the program. That's something that I can do. But in terms of criteria, in terms of like popularity or monthly listeners or whatever it is, I've not been there yet, but who knows, maybe in the future.
Your listening streams have hit 7 figures now.
Yeah.
How does that
feel?
Damn. I think they have.
Yeah.
I can pretty much guarantee that, because I was doing my research on you and I was on Spotify, and I definitely think you've cracked 7 figures. And if not, we're manifesting it right now.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, on Spotify, streams, every year they do like a Spotify Wrapped. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes, 1.3. I don't want to get this wrong, man, but amazingly, your numbers were very high.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. 10, 15 years in the industry.
Yeah, but only releasing work for 2 years,
Wow.
So that seems like a quick come up, I guess. But, all the work that came before, and then I launched at a point where...
Isn't it that they say that you work 90% of the time for that 10% of success?
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, it makes sense.
There's truth in that.
I mean, Robert Greene, who probably my favorite author, says that there's 10,000 hours. I think you've surpassed 10,000 hours, haven't you?
I know, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess in the entirety of the different elements, like
from A to Z.
Like for sure. In terms of music production, on the piano, pushing 10 hours, probably more.
You've forgotten more great music than most people have even learned. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
As a metaphor.
That sometimes gets me because like I'll learn something on the piano, and then I will forget it,
Okay, but I just spotted something here. So you've started releasing your own music through as Matt Wilde on labels or platforms for 2 years.
Yeah.
Prior to that, how was Matt being a musician? Were you selling beats to people?
I've never done that. I have collaborated and given beats to people, so to speak, but I made a lot of mistakes, like I would just throw beats to people who asked for them, and especially if I like their music. Is
that a bad business model though?
That's a bad business model. Yeah. The teenage me made a lot of mistakes, where, so I would always think, right, I'm not going to sell you a beat, but if I like your music, then let's work together. And so, I guess just because I wasn't really thinking about it, I was just like, it was like the love of the music. It was like, let's create beautiful music. Let's create really good art.
What I'm trying to understand is, if it's not too personal, how do you at that time, if you're not putting out your own music, if you're not on a record label, how are you making ends meet?
Different ways. So like, I'm thinking like when I was 16, let's say, so that's early in the journey where I started collaborating with rappers and MCs and other people. So I would often like record in the spare room at my mum's house. I say the spare room, it was actually my bedroom. It's like a small room. That's where I'd record people, and I wasn't charging for that, and so like I wasn't making money doing that, but what I was doing was I was DJing a lot. So I started DJing in different places, and I would get, decent fees for that. At least at the time it felt like that. And then I was also working like retail jobs. I was, doing a bit of freelance work.
When did you start charging for beats?
I guess I've never charged for beats even to this day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, even to this day. I think that's a certain business model that works for some people. But for me today, I'll just only take on a collaboration if it makes sense musically and in terms of my schedule. And now, what I didn't do back then is just be upfront with the artist and talk about splits.
What do you mean by splits?
So when you make a record or a song, you have 100%. Let's say the song has 100%.
So ownership, 100% ownership.
100% ownership. Let's say we wrote the song together.
50-50.
Yeah, but not always, So like, I like to work 50-50. I think it aligns with my values. So when you make a record, you can assign it like 100% in terms of ownership. If you work on that track with other people or that project with other people, you can split it in different ways. So let's say we work on something, we could say 50-50. Not always, to be fair. Sometimes you might allocate 10% to someone, depending on their contributions. I like to go 50-50 because I like the projects that I work on with other people to be equitable in terms of like bringing the music to life. And then there are other splits that are allocated. So if you work with a record label, they will take royalty percentages. And so I wasn't doing that in my early career. I wasn't asking those questions.
For me, this brings up a lot of questions. How do you keep track of that 50%? And where do you keep track of it? So I'm a rapper, you're the music producer.
Yeah.
50-50 is the deal.
Yeah.
How do you get 50% of the revenue from an album sale, a download? How does that work logistically? And then how do you keep me on track to make sure I give you 50-50 when I go on tour or when I do a live performance, because that was still your beat?
Yeah, I mean, that second half is harder to track. I think basically what this relies on is like honesty and trust. So the artists that we've collaborated with or that I've collaborated with, there are so many hoops to jump through in the music game that, for example, you have to make sure the song is registered on different platforms that collect royalties. Like in the UK, I think a lot of us use PRS. So you have to register the song with PRS. You have to put in the metadata like correctly. So my name needs to be put in correctly. Your name does. And then with the record labels as well, the record label might not want to pay me directly. So basically the money for a song, especially in the world that we live in with streaming, I think is collected from lots of different places. And so there are different agencies like PRS, record labels.
Do they also take a cut?
Yes, they do. Distributors. There are performing rights societies. There are publishers. So I've just off the top of my head named 5, entities who will have a potential invested stake in a song. And so if it's your song and I've produced it and made the beat for it, but it is your song, it's a trust game really that you're going to register that song or your team's going to register that song in the appropriate way. And then if registered appropriately and properly, the money should be distributed fairly on like a quarterly basis. And then if you perform that song, you should register with one of the right agencies that you've performed that song, and then you'll get more royalties for it and splits. Yeah. It's an interesting game, and I'm still learning, to be fair.
I mean, it's new. Streaming really only... Do you remember when Tidal was launched?
Yeah, but I never used it.
So Tidal was brought by a collection of music artists.
Yeah.
Jay-Z being one of them.
Yeah.
And I was on Tidal because he would deliberately take some of his albums off Apple Music.
Yeah.
And I remember Reasonable Doubt being one of my favorite albums, and Jay-Z just always removing it. And I was like, I've got to get on Tidal.
Yeah.
In hindsight, I think a lot of these different platforms are the same. I just use Spotify now.
Yeah.
Kind of mainly because Joe Rogan.
Right, okay.
Although to listen to his content, you don't even need to be paying. No. But I just made the switch. But they're competing. And does the competition of these new streaming services make it harder for the artists?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it's harder, but then there are some positives as well.
More exposure, right?
More exposure. They want artists to be releasing on their platforms, and they'll create different pay models. They'll create different exposure models, playlists, and stuff like that to place your songs. And it's always good to land those. So yeah, I think it's okay. I've never really thought about it, to be honest. What are your thoughts on the competition between different, platforms?
So clearly artists make less money now because I think definitely one particular stream counts for less money than one particular physical album sale.
100%.
Although that does make sense. You don't need to package and distribute and send out to every corner of the world a stream rather than an album. Yeah. So it makes sense. But it gives more exposure. So if I can use my podcast as an example, what I've noticed is the downloads I get from South America will be using Amazon Music and Amazon Echo. When I look at my downloads that come from Europe and America, they're mostly Apple and Spotify. So the example that I'm giving is that when you're on different platforms, you're exposed to different places. So if we only put it on Spotify, then chances are Europe is your biggest market.
Yeah.
If you then allow for Google, now you're kind of thinking Asia, because different companies are big in different places.
Yeah.
So again, another example, a German car might be mostly driven about in Europe.
Sure.
If you go to the Middle East, they like their Japanese cars and their bigger cars and their 4x4s and so on and so forth. And I've gone off on a tangent because that's what I do.
No, you're good. No.
This is probably why I have a podcast, because I love to go off on tangents.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I asked you this earlier briefly, but I want to ask you this in depth. And this might be where we end for today, but it's probably the most important question I can ask you. What is the difference? So take this subjectively. It's not a specific question. It's a specific question, but not a specific answer. What is the difference between believing things and hello world? What's the difference between Matt
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to my mind, and I'll just like stream of consciousness, I think the first thing is like musically, it's very different, even though it might sound similar. I've learned so much between those two projects in terms of who I am as a person, how I like to express myself musically. I've learned practical skills like mixing, mastering. I've learned how to work with people better. I've just learned loads. And so Believe in Things at the time was a expression of me in that time of my life. And Hello World was the same just 2 years later. And I think that's the beauty of music. It's almost like we're in a constant dialogue of what was and what is currently.
And what will be.
And what will be potentially.
Or what you're making.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the better you can tune into that conversation, I think the more authentic and actually the better your music can be. And that's what I think of today. I didn't know that when I was writing Believe in Things. I wasn't thinking, conceptually about being an artist and what it takes. But I think more than ever, I think we have to not judge what we're doing in the moment. In a way, I think our job is to just keep on creating and to just express ourselves. Other people can judge our music. That's not our job as artists. Our job is to just keep on writing.
People have to tell you you're great.
Keep on creating, and then other people can, they can, judge your music. But one thing that I think I was doing when I was doing Believe in Things is I was quite caught up in, maybe because it was my first project, I was quite caught up in not like what other people would think, but like I was really self-critical during that time. While I was making that project, I was listening to it and I was being quite overly critical of myself. Whereas today, I think maybe I've gained some confidence and I'm less critical of myself. Although I sometimes get those voices, in my head where it's like, change this, try that. Oh, Matt, that's not good.
You can't ever turn them off though, can you?
Matt, that's not good enough.
Right.
I don't think so, because they still are there. But what I've got better at is quieting them down and just kind of parking that and trying to remain focused on the act of
You have to
creation.
Understand that at the end of the day, no matter what you do, your creative mind will see a flaw in it. But what might be more important than a work of perfection is a work actually put out.
100%. I try and encourage all my friends,
I always tell people, right? And I like to post it on my Instagram because I follow a lot of creatives. And I tell them, like, the world deserves to see your craft, to hear your craft. Get out of your own head, which is difficult because in your head is where all the best things come out of as a creative. Like, it's not like we do maths. There isn't a formula for me to answer this question. It's a form of creation. How I articulate myself and prepare myself for a podcast, different to how I answer a question in an exam. But if I never get out of my own head, then I can never even get better because there's nothing to experiment with. Naturally, if you want to get better, you look at the first thing you dropped in comparison to the 5th and the 10th and the 20th, and you look at intervals and you see your progression. Hopefully there is always progression, but there can only be progression with that critical feedback. The type of honesty that you only get from, if it's not too bold in saying, the type of honesty you can only get from a fan. From someone who is a stranger to you but cares enough about your music to want to see it always be at a top level. And have you found that since you've gotten bigger, you're communicating with your fans more? Do people reach out to you more often? What's the weirdest, most absurd request you've ever gotten?
I'm not sure about absurd requests, but I'll get a lot of this.
Do people ask you to play at their wedding?
Yeah. I've not had that,
Not yet.
Yeah, maybe someone will.
Imagine one day a couple ask me, at our wedding, do you want to conduct the podcast?
Yeah.
We'll do our vows on there. We're here today on episode 56 for the vows of...
Yeah, that's manifesting right there. I mean...
I'm not sure I actually want to do that, but I'm just saying.
No, I know, I'm joking about it. Yeah, obscure stuff... Probably nothing that stands out particularly. I think like DMs is a really weird place because it's weird because some people can feel anonymous, because they are behind a phone, behind devices, behind maybe their thumbnail, maybe their username. So I think sometimes people can be more open sometimes. So, I've had people like reach out to me about their mental health, which for me, it's not obscure and it's
important.
It's important, but I'm not equipped. And nowhere have I ever spoken about mental health. This would be the first time I've ever even said it, to a microphone that will go out into the public. So, that's interesting. I've had that a few times, and I think maybe that's the music connects in a certain way. Maybe it makes them feel something.
I think your music calms people down.
Yeah, maybe. So, I've had people reach out about mental health.
Have they, not to get specific, but have they perhaps said, Matt, how would you deal with this?
No, not even like that. It's more of just like opening up, which I'm not equipped to help with.
Do you not find that absolutely surreal that you, as a musician, have made such a strong impact on this person's life that they chose you to express them? And I get it, you're not a professional. I'm not encouraging people to come to me or you about mental health because there's better people more suited to it. Of course, the door is never closed on them. God forbid.
Absolutely.
But there's more professional people. What I'm realizing though is that someone, a stranger to you, Matt, an absolute stranger, trusted and loved you enough to open up.
Yeah, I think, the professional bit aside, I think that is really one of the reasons why music, and other art forms could breed a similar level of emotional expression and connection. But for me personally, I've been connected to other people's music. Some tracks have been the soundtrack of different parts of my life where things have been going terribly or wrongly or where I've struggled with my own mental health. Music is a constant force and energy that has helped me through hard times. And I think that's the beauty of music. So I would never want to close that door off. But today we live in a world where people can have just direct connection with people through through DMs.
Yes. But it's also risky when you're trying to reach out to someone as busy as Matt.
Yeah.
The problem is because Matt has so many different commitments that even though he'd love to, Matt can't always sit and be there at the time when needed.
Exactly.
So I think what me and Matt are both saying in something like this is that if you're seeking help, by all means reach out. But just remember there are more professional people
who are equipped,
who it's their life's goal. Your life goal is to make amazing music. Which people have opened up to you and trusted you about. But there's people's life goals who's to take care,
of course,
of people with mental health issues.
Yeah. So that's not like obscure, but that's like, that was a time where that took me by surprise.
No, but I think that was the best thing you could have said. Because I'm literally sat here with a completely different perception of the impact that you've made. Because when I think about Matt and what I've seen, I think Matt is someone I will listen to on the way to work or while I'm doing some university work or some architecture work, right? Whereas now I have just realized through your comment that you have made such an impact on people that they have coming to you for the most important things in their life.
Yeah. Without any lyrics.
Without any lyrics.
Crazy.
But just your music...
piano and melody. Yeah. Melodies and piano, And I think, to be an artist, for me, my creative process is to express myself through the tools that I use. And I'm often communicating musically some of my outermost edges. That's how I write music, is to tap into something that is maybe happening in my life, maybe feelings. So a lot of the time I might improvise something on the piano, but I'm not thinking of the codes or the notes or the chords or whatever you see on screen. That kind of comes later, like the theoretical approach.
Do you let it
in
flow?
The moment? Yeah. And that comes from a place of vulnerability. And so what I think about this specific instance is that if I can just be vulnerable, like, in the sketches that I make on the piano, and other people hear that, maybe what I'm trying to say is maybe other people hear that vulnerability as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's stuff like that always takes me by surprise. When people reach out about stuff like that.
It's quite humbling.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it stops to make you think that sometimes we can be obsessive and forget the more important things in life. And I'm glad we live in a society where people are not as afraid as they were 20 years ago to reach out about their mental health, whoever it is they reach out to, because
100%.
We are slowly going towards a healthier society. I feel like in the last 20 years, Britain, I might actually do a podcast on this in the future, Britain has been getting more and more depressed. I feel like people are going into careers for the sake of to make ends meet. I think the dull weather doesn't help, the economic state doesn't help, the politics has been dreadful. But through this bravery and through this speaking up and being on social media, we are now starting to mold the world into what we want it to be collectively. So we have seen political movements in the last 5-6 years that you would have been almost unheard of on such a mass level 30 years ago.
Yeah.
My point being is that I am grateful and encouraged that the generations to come will live in a world more suited to their mental health and their happiness.
Yeah, I think that is good.
I would like to see people more bravely going after what they want to do. We're seeing more and more content creators, more musicians, more podcasters. And I think that's a testament to people paving the way even before us.
Yeah.
And social media.
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
It's the pros and cons.
No, I definitely agree. Yeah.
So a question I pitch to everybody. Do you think AI will change what you do?
Yeah, maybe. I think it can enhance what we're doing currently.
But where do you see it in 10 years?
I imagine a world where AI would be able to replicate certain sounds and generalisms in music.
Well, it's already doing that.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah, I mean, I would say not massively convincingly yet. But I imagine that getting better to the point where it can mimic generalisms in music, certain chord progressions, maybe different instruments. But yeah, I just hope that, I don't know, I think that musicians, we will become custodians of AI, and use that to our advantages. I think that would be the role really going forward, that I personally think that an artist's role is so nuanced in human emotion and connectivity between different tools and emotion that I'm just not sure or educated enough to know to what extent AI will be able to replicate the nuance of the human experience. That's why I call it generalisms and certain, generalisms in music. And so I think that certain music will be replicated and innovated on using AI, like pop music or lo-fi beats or, these types of things that have somewhat formulaic approaches and use certain sounds that AI can,
replicate.
Just easier than I can,
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe like the complexity of jazz, for example. I couldn't imagine a world, I mean, it might exist one day, but in the next 10 years, I can't imagine a world where it can improvise through the nuanced human experience, like improvise with other musicians in the room. I don't know how it would be able to sonically create that in the moment in a way that is listenable and convincing to the listener. But who knows, man? That would be an interesting world.
That's the crazy thing about a creative world with music. Music can be copied.
Yeah, of course.
But it can't be copied.
Yeah.
Because real music is like from the soul, and it sometimes comes from elements of frustration and hours of going. And can AI feel that? How can AI put emotion? Because you can't, I guess we're being hypothetical here, but how do you ask AI to make a sad song?
Yeah, exactly.
Without it sounding like an Adele tune about a breakup?
No, exactly.
How can it sound like the sadness of me right now?
Exactly.
And
and so I think also in terms of, so who would be listening? Who's the audience of AI music?
See, this is the thing, right? I feel like I have these next.
Who wants to listen to that?
Well, okay, so you've heard of the iPad generation.
Yeah.
And that's the generation of kids currently, probably between the ages of 1 to 5, younger or older, who have pretty much had a phone or iPad in their face their whole lives.
Yeah.
I think for those generations of people, the human element is slowly being lost, and they're being desensitized to the idea of constantly needing a human like Matt to make music.
Yeah.
And my point is that with them, they're also going towards schooling systems that are more automated.
Sure.
So can you see how step by step, generation by generation, the human element and the physical and metaphoric touch is no longer there.
I do.
So I reckon kids who are going to be born in 2030 will grow up in 2045 and 2050 with minimal organic human interaction to an extent where it is normal for their favorite podcaster to be AI Format 1 instead of Joe Rogan.
Got you.
Or their favorite rapper to be AI rapper Little Durk instead of Drake. But do you see what's happening?
I do.
Just like how the previous generation struggle with social media and technology, but me and you don't. Because, so me and you weren't raised with phones in our faces, but they were there when we were teenagers.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm trying to say?
I do. Yeah, I think well, desensitized, iPad generation, social media generation, AI generation eventually. I think human connection, I don't think can be lost. And
Do you not think so?
Well, I think it can be lost. Sorry. What I want to say is I think there's a need for humans to have connection.
Socially as
we're social beings. And so music might be subject to, your favorite AI, artist.
Well, think about it. Once upon a time, people couldn't sample and make beats as readily as you do.
Of course, and I totally agree. And so if music is saturated in that way, I would ask, where would that social element that we need as humans come from for that generation that we're talking about? Because it could come from music, a connection to your favorite artist, the words that they're saying, the way that they express themselves. I think we connect to artists because it's almost a reflection of ourselves, and it helps to validate the human experience we're having. And so music might go into a different direction with AI. I think that would be a shame, but I would ask, where would their socialization come from?
Can I give you when socialization changes and it's no longer the human element, then your primary socialization, as much as it would affect you physiologically, I 100% agree, it would be different. You would need something different, I guess. But here's a crazy idea, which just came into my head. What if in 30 years' time, your favorite AI artist, whoever that is, can be generated at will at all times? So therefore, I can go to my phone or whatever I've got in front of me and say, hey Siri, I want to interact with AI artist X. And a hologram pops up and he's like, how are you doing, Lazo? That's not beyond the realm of possibility.
That isn't beyond.
And those kids who are used to technology will look at it and be like, that's
their form of connectivity.
That is that's how I connect to the new AI artist who can be generated in any way at will. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, I can imagine it, actually.
Like, make Tupac pop out of people's phones. They've already hologrammed him on a live show once. But where's the technology to make that permanent? Where we become so technology driven that we forget what human touch is. I mean, that's what
I can imagine a world where that does happen.
That's what the sci-fi movies are always predicting.
Yeah, Black Mirror.
Black Mirror, indeed. And having said that, when you actually look at where you think we'd be, I think as humans, we thought we might have flying cars. And
I know.
We're not quite there yet.
No.
But I don't know if that's something worth complaining about, looking at the pollution numbers.
Yeah.
But wow.
Yeah, so AI, I think humans have a responsibility to, be custodians of AI, especially in the music industry, manage that well. And as long as it enhances the experience that other people have through music.
Well, I just had another thought as well. And I think this ties into something I always say. What I just said to you about AI holograms popping through your phone, that kind of says to me that I'm in a bubble of the Western world. Because I might experience that in 30 years, but there's many countries that won't. Many developing countries, and actually the vast majority of the world that don't have access to that.
Exactly.
So actually what I just said can be contradicted by the fact that what I'm saying might only be available to a small population of the world to begin with. Because so much of the world is still developing. Especially places like sub-Saharan Africa,
of course,
which are very rapidly increasing. My point being, my envisionment of is that a word? Envisionment?
Yeah, is now.
But it's not everybody's.
Yeah,
it's not everybody's.
Yeah.
So I love that. So plug your work for everybody, man. Where can they download your stuff?
So Matt Wilde on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to music. Instagram at Matt Wilde Music, at Matt Wilde Music on YouTube. I think that's it, really.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, lovely conversation. Thanks, man.
And everybody, you know the usual, like, share, subscribe. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and I'll see you out on the next one.
Sweet.